Welcome to the Story and Fact channel. Today, we are diving deep into the life of one of history's most famous and controversial figures, Christopher Columbus. His story is more complex than many of us were taught, so let's uncover the full picture. Christopher Columbus was born in 1451 in Genoa, which is in modern-day Italy. His father was a middle-class wool weaver, and from a young age, Columbus was drawn to the sea. He began his maritime career as a teenager, sailing on merchant ships in the Mediterranean and Aegean seas. He was largely self-educated, learning to read Latin, Portuguese, and Castilian, and he devoured books on astronomy, geography, and history. He read Marco Polo's travels with great interest, which fueled his belief that Asia could be reached by sailing west. In the 1470s, Columbus moved to Lisbon, Portugal, which was the hub of European maritime exploration at the time. He married Filipa Perestrello Manas, a noblewoman whose father had been involved in the settlement of the Madeira Islands. Through this connection, Columbus gained access to charts and information about Portuguese navigation in the Atlantic. During this period, he sailed on several voyages, possibly traveling as far as Iceland in the north and the coast of Guinea in West Africa. This was the age of exploration, driven by the desire for spices, gold, and other valuable goods from Asia. The traditional land routes, like the Silk Road, were long, dangerous, and controlled by rival powers. The Portuguese were pioneering a route around Africa, but Columbus had a different, more radical idea. Based on his calculations, which we now know were flawed, he believed the Earth was much smaller than it actually is. He estimated that Japan, which he called Cipangu, was only about 2,400 miles west of the Canary Islands. The actual distance is closer to 12,000 miles. Convinced his plan was feasible, Columbus first proposed his enterprise of the Indies to King John II of Portugal around 1485. He sought funding for a westward voyage to Asia. However, the king's experts reviewed the proposal and rejected it. They correctly believed Columbus had grossly underestimated the distance. Undeterred, Columbus left Portugal and took his idea to Spain. He spent the next 7 years lobbying the Spanish monarchs, Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. This was a difficult time for Columbus. He faced repeated rejections and lived in poverty, but his belief in his mission never wavered. His persistence finally paid off in 1492. After the Spanish successfully concluded the Reconquista by capturing Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula, Isabella and Ferdinand were ready for a new venture. They agreed to finance Columbus's expedition, hoping to gain an advantage over their rival, Portugal. They promised him the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea, the position of governor and viceroy over any lands he claimed for Spain, and 10% of all the revenues from those lands. On August 3, 1492, Columbus set sail from Palos de la Frontera with 3 ships, the Nia, the Pinta, and his flagship, the Santa Maria. The crew of about 90 men was anxious. They were sailing into uncharted waters, and the journey was much longer than Columbus had promised. After a stop in the Canary Islands for repairs and supplies, they sailed west into the vast unknown. Weeks turned into more than a month, and the crew grew restless, even threatening mutiny. Columbus had to keep 2 sets of logbooks, one with the real distance traveled, and a fake one that showed a shorter distance to keep the crew's morale up. Finally, on October 12, 1492, a lookout named Rodrigo de Triana aboard the Pinta spotted land. It was an island in the Bahamas, which the native Taino people called Guanahan. Columbus named it San Salvador. Believing he had reached the East Indies, he called the indigenous people Indians, a misnomer that stuck for centuries. He was met by the peaceful Taino people, whom he described in his journal as handsome and generous, but also as potential servants. From the very beginning, his goals were clear: find gold and claim the land for Spain. He spent the next few months exploring the Caribbean, visiting islands that are now Cuba and Hispaniola, the island that today comprises Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He was constantly searching for signs of the wealthy Asian civilizations Marco Polo had described, but he found none. What he did find was a small amount of gold worn by the natives. On Christmas Eve, the Santa Maria ran aground and had to be abandoned. Using its timbers, Columbus's men built a settlement on Hispaniola called La Navidad and left 39 men behind to search for gold. This was the first European settlement in the Americas. In January 1493, Columbus set sail back to Spain on the Nia, taking several captive Taino people with him to present to the Spanish court. His return to Spain was triumphant. He was greeted as a hero. He presented the captured natives, along with parrots, strange plants, and the small amounts of gold he'd found, to Ferdinand and Isabella. The monarchs were pleased and quickly authorized a second, much larger expedition. This time, Columbus commanded a fleet of 17 ships with over 1,200 men, including soldiers, farmers, and priests. The goal was to establish permanent colonies and exploit the resources of the new territories. Columbus's second voyage, which began in late 1493, marked a dark turn. When he returned to the La Navidad settlement on Hispaniola, he found it destroyed and all 39 men he'd left behind killed, likely due to their own abusive behavior towards the Taino. In response, Columbus launched a brutal campaign against the native population. He established a new colony, Isabella, and implemented a system called the encomienda. This system granted Spanish colonists control over native laborers, forcing them to mine for gold and work on plantations. It was essentially a system of slavery. Those who failed to meet their gold quotas faced horrific punishments. His governance of the colony was disastrous. His obsession with finding gold and his harsh treatment of both the natives and the Spanish colonists led to widespread discontent. Diseases brought by the Europeans, to which the indigenous people had no immunity, began to decimate the population. Within a few decades of Columbus's arrival, the Taino population of Hispaniola was nearly wiped out through disease, overwork, and violence. Columbus made 2 more voyages to the Americas. On his third voyage in 1498, he reached the mainland of South America, near present-day Venezuela. But by this time, reports of his tyrannical rule and mismanagement in Hispaniola had reached Spain. The Spanish monarchs sent a royal official to investigate. In 1500, Columbus and his brothers were arrested, put in chains, and sent back to Spain to face charges. Although he was eventually pardoned by the king and queen, he was stripped of his titles as governor and viceroy. His monopoly on exploration was over. He was granted one final voyage. In 1502, he set off on his 4th expedition, still hoping to find a westward passage to Asia. He explored the coast of Central America, from Honduras to Panama, but the voyage was plagued by storms and hostile encounters. He ended up shipwrecked on the island of Jamaica for a year before he and his surviving crew were rescued. Christopher Columbus returned to Spain for the last time in 1504, a sick and disappointed man. He had failed to find the great riches of Asia and had lost his prestigious titles and control over the lands he had claimed. He spent the last 2 years of his life trying to get the Spanish crown to restore his privileges and grant his family the profits he believed he was owed. He died on May 20, 1506, still convinced that the lands he had visited were part of the Asian continent. He never knew he had encountered a new world. The legacy of Christopher Columbus is profoundly complex and controversial. For centuries, he was celebrated as a heroic discoverer who bravely sailed into the unknown and connected to worlds. His voyages did initiate a period of immense exchange, the Columbian Exchange, which saw plants, animals, technologies, and ideas transferred between the Eastern and Western hemispheres. This transformed the world, introducing crops like potatoes and corn to Europe and horses and wheat to the Americas. However, in recent decades, this celebratory narrative has been challenged. Critics rightly point out that you can't discover a land that is already inhabited. More importantly, Columbus's arrival initiated centuries of colonization, exploitation, and the catastrophic decline of indigenous populations across the Americas. His actions on Hispaniola set a brutal precedent for how European powers would treat native peoples. Today, Columbus is seen by many not as a hero, but as a figure who symbolizes the violence and oppression of colonialism. His story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths of our shared history and to understand that the age of exploration had devastating consequences for millions of people. It's a powerful reminder that history is often written by the victors, and it's our job to look deeper and understand the full, often painful story. Thank you for watching this episode of Story and Fact. What are your thoughts on Christopher Columbus? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. We'll see you next time.